My name is Rachel, and 5 years ago, my cousin told my family I stole from the business. She lied, and that single lie cost me my entire inheritance. They cut me out of the will, they locked me out of the bakery my grandmother built with her own hands. For 5 years, I was no one's heir. Then last month, the franchise paperwork arrived, and when my mother saw my name on the signature line, she grabbed the counter so hard she broke a fingernail clean off. Here's the thing, I didn't just lose a bakery. I lost 30 years of my grandmother's recipes, her handwritten notes, the smell of cinnamon that lived in the walls. My cousin Emma told everyone I'd been skimming from the register. She had the books to prove it, never mind that she'd doctored them herself. My family believed her because believing me would mean admitting their golden girl was a liar, so they locked me out, changed the locks, told me I was dead to them. And for 5 years, I let them believe it. But last month, the franchise paperwork arrived in my name. My grandmother had signed it before she died, and that document changed everything. To understand how, you need to go back to where it all started. It started in 1967 with a woman named Evelyn Rossi and a storefront on Mulberry Street in Little Italy. My grandmother arrived from Naples with nothing but a rolling pin and 6 recipes written on napkins. She called it Rossi's Bakery, a single display case, 2 ovens that barely held temperature, and a line out the door every Sunday morning. She built it with her hands, kneading dough at 3 a.m. while my grandfather worked double shifts at the docks. By the time I was born, Rossi's had moved to a bigger space in Westchester. 2 locations, 15 employees, a reputation that stretched across 3 counties. Growing up, there were 2 granddaughters in the Rossi house, but only one who mattered. My cousin Emma is 6 months older. She was born with flour in her blood, or that's what everyone said. She could work the register at 10. She knew every customer's name by 12. She had the charm, the laugh, the ability to make my grandmother's eyes crinkle with pride just by walking through the door. I was the quiet one, the one who stayed in the back watching. Not because I didn't want to be seen, but because I was watching for the cracks. The things Emma smoothed over with a smile that I noticed but never said aloud. Here's a small example. When I was 14, I spent the summer learning my grandmother's sourdough starter, a 70-year-old culture she'd brought from Italy. I documented every feeding, every temperature variation, every rise time in a notebook. End of summer, I brought her a loaf I'd baked myself. She took one bite, handed it to Emma, and said, "See, this is how it should taste." Not to me, to Emma, like I was standing in the wrong place. But I didn't give up. I poured myself into the business in a different way: numbers, spreadsheets, supply chain. I figured if I couldn't be the granddaughter who charmed the customers, I'd be the one who saved them money. And for one brief moment, I was. The year I turned 23, I redesigned the inventory system and cut costs by 18%. My grandmother looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You have the head for this, Rachel." Those 5 words kept me working 14-hour shifts for 2 straight years. Then came the expansion plan. We needed a third location, maybe a franchise model. My grandmother was 78, tired and worried about legacy. I drafted a proposal, a full franchise package with operating standards, training protocols, royalty structures. I presented it to the family at a Sunday dinner in March of 2018. My father nodded, my aunt said nothing. And Emma, sitting across the table with a glass of red wine, smiled that smile that stops at the mouth. "Interesting," she said, "but we should probably consult a professional before we let Rachel run with this." She planted the seed that night, small and quiet, that I was inexperienced, that I was reaching above my station, that the numbers looked good because I'd fudged them to make myself look good. My grandmother waved it off at the table, but the seed had already taken root. 6 months later, my grandmother died. Heart attack, sudden. No will had been filed, or so everyone believed. The bakery went into a trust controlled by my father and aunt. Emma moved into the management office the week after the funeral. I was given the morning shift baking, the same job I'd had since I was 17, demoted, humiliated. But I stayed because I loved that bakery like it was my own blood. The lie came on a Thursday in November. Emma found me in the office at the end of my shift. She said she'd noticed a discrepancy in the cash deposits, $3,200 missing over 3 months. She said she had receipts, logs, timestamps. She said she had proof. I asked to see them. She said, "I'll show the family first." She gathered everyone, my father, my aunt, my uncle, in the back room, laid out the evidence, spreadsheets with my initials, log entries that showed I'd closed out registers with shortages. She never raised her voice. She was calm, measured, the picture of reluctant duty. "I didn't want to believe it," she said, "but the numbers don't lie." I tried to explain. I told them the log entries were forged. I'd never closed those registers. I asked to compare the signatures. My father wouldn't look at me. My aunt said, "You've always been good with numbers, Rachel, maybe too good." My grandmother was dead, and there was no one left who could testify to the truth. The next morning, the locks were changed. My key didn't work. My personal belongings, a photograph of my grandmother, my notebook of recipes, my apron, were bagged and left on the back steps. A certified letter arrived 3 days later informing me that the family had voted to remove me from the business permanently. The bakery's attorney would be filing a report with the district attorney's office regarding the missing funds. If I agreed not to contest the removal, they would not press charges. I was 26 years old. I had no savings, no job, no recommendation I could use, and I had become the person my family needed me to be, the scapegoat. For 5 years, I built a new life. I moved 3 hours north. I managed a coffee shop, then a restaurant. I learned the commercial side of the food industry, the numbers, the margins, the vendor relationships that my grandmother had never taught me. And in the dark of night, I would lie awake thinking about the one thing I never could explain. Why didn't anyone ever ask me for my side? Why did they believe her without a single question? The answer came when I least expected it. Last month, a certified envelope arrived at my apartment. Return address, Goldstein and Associates, estate attorneys. Inside, a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, informing me that my grandmother had executed a codicil to her will 6 months before her death, a codicil she'd kept secret from everyone, including Emma. It granted me exclusive rights to the Rossi's Bakery franchise model and named me the sole inheritor of the trademark and operating system. The paperwork had been with the firm the entire time. They'd been waiting 5 years for the right moment to deliver it. And that's when I realized the lie didn't just cost me 5 years. It gave Emma 5 years to destroy what my grandmother built. I flew back to Westchester the next morning. I drove past the original bakery. Rossi's was gone. The sign had been replaced. A national chain's logo hung where my grandmother's name used to be. Emma had franchised the business to a corporation, sold the recipes, surrendered the legacy, all without telling anyone that the true franchise owner was sitting 3 hours north, waiting for a piece of paper that changed everything. That paper was now in my hand, and the people who locked me out were about to learn who actually owned the building. That paper was now in my hand, and the people who locked me out were about to learn who actually owned the building. I stood in my apartment in Beacon, New York, 3 hours north of Westchester, staring at the letter from Goldstein and Associates. The codicil was real. My grandmother had signed it 6 months before she died in the presence of a notary and 2 witnesses. It granted me exclusive rights to the Rossi's Bakery franchise model, trademark, and operating system. It named me the sole inheritor of the intellectual property that Emma had just sold to a national chain. But legal papers don't operate in a vacuum. The day after I received the letter, I drove back to Westchester. I needed to see the bakery with my own eyes. The drive took 2 hours and 40 minutes. I knew the route by heart, the same exit I'd taken 1,000 times, the same left turn onto Mulberry Avenue. But when I reached the block, the sign was wrong. The red and cream awning I'd grown up under was gone. A garish green and yellow logo hung above the door, Crust & Co., a national chain that had bought up 15 independent bakeries in the Northeast in the past 2 years. I parked across the street and sat in my car for 10 minutes. Through the window, I could see the display cases, the same ones my grandmother had installed in '93. The layout was identical, the placement of the register, the coffee station against the back wall. Emma hadn't changed anything physical, she just changed the name and the recipes. She sold our grandmother's sourdough formula as part of the franchise package. That recipe, the one I'd spent a summer documenting, the one with the 70-year-old starter, was now corporate property. I got out of the car and walked inside. The girl at the counter was maybe 20, wearing a Crust & Co. polo shirt. She smiled and asked what I'd like. I ordered a black coffee and sat in the corner booth, the same booth where I'd done my homework as a kid, where my grandmother used to sit with me during slow afternoons and tell me about Naples. The coffee was fine, it wasn't Rossi's, it wasn't even close. I asked the girl if the manager was available. She pointed to a back office. I knocked, the door opened, and a man in his 40s in a Crust & Co. polo looked at me with polite impatience. "Can I help you?" I asked if he knew who owned the franchise rights for this location. He said, "Corporate, we're a Crust & Co. location now. All inquiries go through the regional office." I asked who signed the franchise agreement on the seller's side. He said he didn't have that information, but the previous owners had sold the entire operation, building, recipes, name, everything. I asked if he could confirm the previous owner's name. He looked at his clipboard. "Welland," he said, "Emma Welland." She'd used her married name. The sale had been final for 18 months. I thanked him and left. Back in my car, I called the number on the Goldstein letter. A paralegal named Diane answered. I told her what I'd found. She asked me to hold. I listened to elevator music for 3 minutes, then Diane came back on the line. "Ms. Rossi, I've checked the chain of title. The franchise rights were never legally transferred to any third party. The codicil you hold predates any sale agreement. According to New York law, the intellectual property belongs to you, and the sale of it without your authorization is legally void." I asked if that meant the chain had to return the recipes. She said, "It means the chain didn't buy what they thought they bought. They purchased a franchise license from someone who didn't own the franchise rights. That's a legal problem for Emma, not for you." I asked what I should do next. She said, "Wait, they'll come to you." And she was right. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from a law firm representing Crust & Co. Corporate Counsel. The letter was polite but direct. It stated that Crust & Co. had acquired exclusive rights to the Rossi's Bakery brand and recipes from Emma Welland in a transaction dated October 14, 2022. They had paid $420,000 for those rights. They had rebranded and reopened the Westchester location. They had plans to expand to 3 additional locations within 2 years. They were now aware of a potential competing claim to the intellectual property. They demanded that I produce any documentation supporting my claim within 14 business days, or they would proceed with legal action to confirm their ownership. 14 business days. I had exactly 2 weeks to prove that my grandmother's codicil was valid, that Emma had no authority to sell the franchise, and that the chain's purchase was based on a fraudulent title. I drove to the offices of Goldstein and Associates the next morning. The firm occupied the third floor of a brick building in White Plains. Michael Goldstein was in his late 60s, with silver hair and reading glasses that he pushed up his forehead when he talked. He shook my hand and gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "I knew your grandmother well," he said. "She was one of the sharpest businesswomen I've ever represented, and she knew exactly what she was doing when she signed that codicil." He explained the timeline. My grandmother had come to him 6 months before her death, worried about the future. She didn't trust her daughter, my aunt, to manage the business. She didn't trust Emma either. She used the word calculating. She told Goldstein that Emma had been pressuring her to sign over the franchise model for months, claiming she had investors ready to fund expansion. My grandmother refused. Instead, she executed the codicil, naming me as the sole inheritor of the franchise intellectual property. She kept it secret because she knew that if Emma found out, she would try to overturn it before my grandmother died. "She told me," Goldstein said, "that you were the one who understood the numbers. She said you were the only one who could carry it forward the right way." I asked why he waited 5 years to contact me. He leaned back in his chair. "Your grandmother gave me specific instructions. She said, if Rachel is still out of the business after 5 years, she's never coming back. Deliver the codicil then, but if she comes back on her own before that, wait until the moment of greatest impact." He paused. "I've been watching, and when I saw the Crest and Co. deal go through, I knew the moment had arrived." I asked what my legal options were. Goldstein pulled out a folder thick with tabs. "We have a clear chain of title. The codicil was properly witnessed and notarized. The franchise rights are legally yours. However, Crest & Co. purchased those rights from Emma in good faith. They will argue that they are innocent buyers. We will argue that Emma never had the authority to sell and therefore no title passed. This will likely go to court unless we can settle." Ordinary people can talk all they want about doing what's right. The problem is that in many legal systems, even a clear moral claim costs money and time to enforce. Goldstein estimated 6 to 9 months of litigation, at least $50,000 in legal fees, and no guarantee of a quick resolution. I didn't have $50,000. I had $4,000 in savings and a coffee shop manager's salary. But I had something else. I had the recipes. My grandmother's actual handwritten annotated recipe book, the one I'd taken from the bakery the day before the locks were changed. Emma had never asked for it. She had the formulas in the computer system, but she didn't have the original notes. The notes that included proof of authorship, dates, changes, my grandmother's handwriting that could be authenticated by a graphologist. I told Goldstein about the book. His eyes sharpened. "That book is evidence of intellectual property creation and ownership. If we can prove your grandmother wrote those recipes and that she never authorized their transfer to Emma, it strengthens our claim dramatically. But it also means we need to keep that book safe. No copies, no photographs, no digital uploads, not until we have a protective order." I went home and opened my grandmother's recipe book for the first time in 5 years. The cover was stained with flour and butter. The pages were soft from years of use. On the inside front cover in her handwriting, "For Rachel who has the head and the heart, use these well." I had never told anyone about that inscription, not even during the confrontation. I had kept it hidden because it was the only thing I had left that was mine. I turned to the sourdough recipe, the one the chain was now using. The margins were filled with my grandmother's notes in Italian and English, dates from the 1980s, adjustments she'd made over the decades. The final line, written in 2016, "Perfect rise at 72 degrees, Rachel's measurements worked." Her handwriting, my name, a date stamp that predated the sale by 6 years. This was the evidence. This was the proof that the franchise intellectual property was never Emma's to sell. I closed the book and placed it in the fireproof safe I kept in my closet, the same safe where I stored my birth certificate and my grandmother's photograph. The next morning, I got an email from Emma. Subject, let's talk. Body, Rachel, I know you have the codicil. I know you've been to Goldstein. I know about the recipe book. Let's meet, not as lawyers, as family. Coffee at the old bakery tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come alone. She knew about the recipe book. That bothered me. I hadn't told anyone except Goldstein. The chain's lawyers knew I had a claim, but they couldn't know about the book, unless Emma had been tracking me, unless she knew something she shouldn't. I wrote back, "I'll be there." I spent the evening replaying every conversation, every interaction, every moment I could remember from the years before the lie, and I started to see something I'd missed. Emma didn't just steal from me, she had been planning this for years. The fake shortage, the family vote, the removal, the silence, it wasn't a single crime of opportunity. It was a strategic operation designed to clear her path to the franchise. I called Goldstein. He answered on the first ring. "Don't go alone," he said. "I have to. If I bring anyone, she'll use it to say I'm hostile. I need her to speak freely." Then record the conversation. New York is a one-party consent state. As long as you are a participant, you can record without telling her. I didn't sleep that night. At 9:45 the next morning, I walked into the Crust & Co. location, my grandmother's bakery, and sat in the same corner booth. I placed my phone on the table, voice memo app running, screen side down. At 10:03, Emma walked through the door. She looked different, sharper, thinner, her hair was shorter, blonder. She wore a tailored black blazer and heels. She carried a leather portfolio. She sat down across from me without a greeting, placed her hands flat on the table and said, "You shouldn't have come back." I tilted my head. "You invited me." "I invited you to give you a chance to walk away. Quietly, I'll give you $50,000, that's more than the recipes are worth to you. You take the money, sign a non-disclosure, and disappear. You keep the codicil, but you never use it." "Why would I do that?" "Because if you don't, I'll burn it down, the bakery, the recipes, everything. I'll file for bankruptcy. I'll transfer assets offshore. I'll make sure there's nothing left for you to inherit. And I'll drag this out in court for 3 years. You don't have the money for that fight, I do." I looked at her, really looked. "You sold our grandmother's legacy to a chain, you changed her recipes, you replaced her name with a logo, and now you want to pay me to stay silent. I'm offering you a way out, I'm offering you money, take it." "What if I refuse?" Her eyes went cold. "Then I'll tell the court that the codicil was forged, that you pressured our grandmother when she was sick, that you manipulated her. I have witnesses who will say you were greedy, that you only cared about the money. I have documents that show you were the one with the motive to steal from the bakery. I made sure of that 5 years ago. The narrative is already set. You'll be fighting uphill, and I have the resources to make sure you lose." She slid a check across the table, $50,000 made out to me, dated that morning. I looked at the check. I looked at Emma. I thought about my grandmother's handwriting in the margins of her recipe book. I thought about the 70-year-old sourdough starter that was now cranking out mass-produced loaves in a corporate commissary. I picked up the check, I folded it in half, I put it in my pocket. Emma smiled, "Smart decision." "You're right," I said, "I do need to think about this. Give me 48 hours. Her smile tightened. 24, I want your answer by noon tomorrow." She stood, picked up her portfolio, and walked out without looking back. I sat in the booth for another 10 minutes, then I pulled out my phone, stopped the voice memo, and played it back. The entire conversation captured her admission that she had set the narrative 5 years ago, her threat to destroy the bakery, the check as a bribe. I sent the audio file to Goldstein with a one-line message, "Evidence." Then I pulled the check out of my pocket, $50,000 signed by Emma Wellen. I took a photograph of both sides and sent it to Goldstein as well. I walked out of the bakery, my grandmother's bakery, and drove straight to the county courthouse. I had a codicil, a recipe book, and a recorded confession, but I also had a sinking feeling that Emma was telling the truth about one thing. She had the resources to drag this out, she had connections, she had the chain's legal team behind her, and she had 5 years of preparation while I had 5 years of absence. The fight was just beginning, but I had something she didn't have. I had the truth, and I had my grandmother's handwriting on every page. I was about to learn that truth alone is never enough. You need leverage, and leverage requires moving before your opponent expects it. I was about to learn that truth alone is never enough. You need leverage, and leverage requires moving before your opponent expects it. Goldstein called me at 7 the next morning. I filed the emergency motion for a temporary restraining order. It's been granted. The chain cannot use the recipes or the Rossi's trademark until a hearing in 10 days. The judge also ordered Emma to preserve all documents related to the sale. I asked what that meant for Emma's 24-hour deadline. He laughed, a dry, lawyerly laugh. "It means she's out of time. The check you gave me, I deposited it into an escrow account. That's now evidence of attempted bribery. We'll hold it." I felt a surge of relief, but Goldstein wasn't done. "Rachel, there's something else. I ran the corporate records on Crust & Co. The parent company is called Heritage Bread Holdings. I pulled their investor list. Your father's name is on it." I stopped breathing. "Which one?" "Jerome Rossi, your father. He invested $200,000 in Heritage Bread Holdings in March of 2022, 7 months before the sale. My father, the same man who had sat at the family dinner table and voted to remove me from the bakery. The same man who had told me the evidence was clear. He had invested in the company that would buy the franchise rights from Emma. He had a financial stake in the deal. I asked Goldstein to send me the document. He did. I stared at the screen, my father's signature next to a 7-figure wire confirmation. He wasn't just complicit in the cover-up, he was a partner in the theft. I called him, he answered on the second ring. His voice was cautious, like he'd been expecting this call. Rachel. Dad, I have the codicil, I have the TRO, and I have the Heritage Bread investor list. Silence, then I can explain. You invested in the company that bought our grandmother's recipes. You knew Emma didn't have the rights. You knew she forged the shortage evidence. You knew everything. I didn't know about the codicil, I swear. Emma told me the franchise rights were hers. She had paperwork, she had a lawyer, I believed her. You believed her because it was easier than believing me, and you made money off it. I was trying to protect the business, the bakery was failing, the chain offered a way to keep it alive. By selling it to a corporation, by erasing Nana's name. I could hear him breathing, he was crying. I'm sorry, Rachel, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't rebuild what you destroyed. But I didn't say that, I said, I need to know everything you know about Emma's plan, and I need it in writing. He agreed. He sent me a long email that night, copied to Goldstein, detailing conversations he'd had with Emma over the previous 3 years, her strategy to isolate me, her manipulation of the family, her plan to sell the franchise to Heritage Bread. He included dates, names, dollar amounts. He wrote that Emma had told him the codicil didn't exist, that I was making it up, that she had a separate will from our grandmother that gave her full control. He ended with, I was wrong, I should have fought for you, I was scared of losing what little I had left. I forwarded the email to Goldstein. His response came back in 3 words, this changes everything. The next morning, the chain's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss the TRO, arguing that Heritage Bread Holdings had purchased the franchise rights in good faith and would suffer irreparable harm if prevented from using the recipes. They attached an affidavit from Emma swearing that she had sole authority over the intellectual property. They also filed a countersuit against me for defamation and tortious interference with contract, claiming $75,000 in damages. Goldstein called, they're trying to bury you in paperwork, standard scorched earth. They want you to run out of money before the hearing. I had $4,000. The $50,000 check was frozen as evidence. I needed cash to pay for the expert witnesses Goldstein wanted, a handwriting analyst, a forensic accountant, a franchise law specialist. The cost was going to exceed $30,000 before the hearing. I didn't have it, but I had something else. I called the local news, a reporter named Diana Reyes who had covered business disputes before. I told her the story. She interviewed me for an hour. That evening, her segment aired on the 11 o'clock news. Woman says cousin sold family bakery recipes to national chain without permission, now she's fighting to get them back. The segment included a clip of me holding my grandmother's recipe book, the inscription visible. It included a freeze frame of the Heritage Bread investor list with my father's name. It included a statement from Goldstein. The law is clear. The codicil is valid. The franchise rights belong to Rachel Rossi. Within an hour, the story went viral, local first, then regional. Someone clipped it and posted it on social media. By morning, it had over 1 million views. The comments were brutal, mostly directed at Emma and the chain. Goldstein called again at 6 a.m. The chain's corporate office just reached out. They want to talk. They're offering a settlement. How much? They're willing to pay you $250,000 for the franchise rights, plus a licensing agreement that gives you royalties on any future use of the recipes. You'd retain the trademark. I asked what the catch was. You have to drop the TRO and agree to a non-disclosure about the details of the settlement. Emma would not be part of the agreement. She'd still face legal consequences from the chain for selling assets she didn't own. $250,000, royalties, the trademark. But Emma would walk away with nothing except a lawsuit from the chain. My father's investment would become worthless, Heritage Bread would likely terminate the deal. The family would be fractured, but the bakery's legacy, the recipes, would be preserved. I could open a new location. I could honor my grandmother's name. I told Goldstein to negotiate for $400,000. He called back in 3 hours. $325,000 plus a 10% royalty on all sales using the Rossi's recipes, capped at $50,000 per year for 10 years. And you keep the trademark. I took the deal. The settlement was signed 3 days later in a conference room in White Plains. I sat across from 3 lawyers representing Heritage Bread Holdings. Emma was not present. She had been served with a separate lawsuit from the chain for fraudulent conveyance the same morning. The chain's attorney slid the settlement agreement across the table. This is the final version. Please review and initial each page. I read every line, then I signed. The chain's lead lawyer nodded. The recipes will be removed from all Crust & Co. locations within 90 days. The trademark returns to you, and you will receive the wire transfer by end of business today. I asked if they were going to pursue Emma. The lawyer said that's a separate matter, but yes, we intend to recover our losses. I left the conference room, walked to my car, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time. I had won, but winning felt hollow. I had the legal rights back, I had money, I had the recipes, but I had lost my family. My father had apologized, but trust doesn't rebuild overnight. My aunt refused to speak to me. Emma was facing a lawsuit that could bankrupt her. And the bakery building, the original location, was still a crust. The lease was held by the chain, and they weren't obligated to give it up. But the story didn't end there. 3 weeks after the settlement, I received a letter from the property management company that owned the Mulberry Street building. They had received a notice from the chain that they were terminating the lease effective January 31st. The building would be vacant. I called the property manager. He told me the space was available for lease. First right of refusal goes to the previous tenant, but they're walking away. You interested? I signed a new lease that week. 600 square feet, same display cases, same ovens, still there. The chain had never replaced them. I spent the next 2 months renovating. I hired the same contractor who had installed the original shelving in 1967. I used the settlement money to buy new equipment, but I kept the old mixers, the proofing cabinet, the wooden counter where my grandmother had rolled out dough. I called the bakery Rossi's, the same name, the same red and cream color scheme. I reached out to the employees who had worked there under the chain and offered them their jobs back. 2 of them returned, the others had moved on. And on a Sunday morning in March, exactly 1 year after I received that first certified letter from Goldstein, I reopened the doors. The line stretched down the block. People who remembered my grandmother came. People who had seen the news story came. People who had never tasted real sourdough came. I stood behind the counter, my station, my name above the door, and served the first loaf to a woman who had been a regular in the 1980s. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and said, "It tastes the same." That's when I understood. The recipes were not just ingredients and temperatures. They were a connection to my grandmother, to the past, to a version of myself I had almost lost. And I had saved them, not alone, but I had saved them. Emma's case went to court 6 months later. She was ordered to pay Heritage Bread $200,000 in damages. She declared bankruptcy. She moved to Florida. I haven't spoken to her since. My father and I are slowly rebuilding. He comes to the bakery every Saturday morning. He buys a loaf of sourdough. He sits in the corner. He doesn't say much, but he shows up. That's the beginning. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart, you know that the hardest part isn't the loss of the thing they took. It's the loss of the person you thought they were. You don't just grieve the betrayal, you grieve the version of them that existed before the lie, and that version never really comes back. But the truth does. It takes time, it takes evidence, it takes people who believe you, but it finds its way. And when it arrives, it reshapes everything. Not always the way you wanted, but often the way you needed. My grandmother believed in me. She left me the keys, literally and figuratively. And after all the legal battles, the betrayals, the years of silence, I finally know what she meant. The bakery is open, the recipe book is in a safe deposit box now, but I know every line by heart. And my grandmother's name is back where it belongs. My grandmother's name is back where it belongs, but the story doesn't end with a sign above the door. It ends the way all real stories end, with the quiet moments that nobody films. The first Saturday after reopening, my father showed up at 6 a.m. I was already in the back, mixing the sourdough starter. He knocked on the kitchen door. I opened it. He was holding a paper bag. "I brought breakfast," he said, "from the diner, the one you liked as a kid." I let him in. He sat on the flour-dusted stool in the corner and watched me work. He didn't try to help. He didn't offer advice. He just sat there drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup, watching his daughter knead dough the way her grandmother taught her. Around 8, the morning rush started. Customers came in, regulars from the old days, new faces drawn by the news story. My father stood and walked to the front of the house. He stood by the display case, hands in his pockets, and watched people buy the bread. Every time someone said, "This is exactly how I remembered it," he nodded. Once I saw him wipe his eyes. He came back to the kitchen at 9:30. "I should go," he said. "You're busy." "Stay," I said. "I could use a hand with the pastry trays." He stayed for 3 hours. He learned the register. He learned the names of the morning regulars. He learned that the sourdough sells out by 10 and that the olive bread is a close second. At noon, he took off his apron and hung it on the hook by the door. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said, and he was. 2 months later, the property manager called me with an update. The original Mulberry Street storefront, the 1967 location, the one that had been sold to a different business years before, was available. The tenant was closing. He asked if I wanted the first offer. I drove to Mulberry Street that afternoon. The building was smaller than I remembered. The windows were dusty. The old sign frame was still there, the one that had held Rossi's Bakery in gold letters before my grandfather sold the building in the early 80s. I stood on the sidewalk and imagined my grandmother, 29 years old, unlocking that door for the first time. I called Goldstein, can I afford to lease it? He ran the numbers. Barely, but if you structure it as a second location with shared overhead, you can make it work. The rent is reasonable, and the historical value, it's a marketing asset. I signed the lease the same week. The renovation took 5 months longer than expected. The building hadn't been maintained, the plumbing was original, the electrical needed a complete overhaul, but I kept the original floor tiles. I kept the wooden shelving that my grandmother had installed. I found an old photograph in the county archives, the bakery's grand opening in 1967, my grandmother in a white apron, my grandfather in a suit, a crowd of neighbors holding cups of coffee. I framed it and hung it by the entrance. The second location opened on a Saturday in October. The weather was perfect, crisp air, golden light, the kind of autumn day that New England does better than anywhere else. The line stretched down the block before I unlocked the door. People brought flowers. Someone had found a vintage Rossi's Bakery coffee mug and gave it to me as a gift. I stood behind the counter, the same spot my grandmother had stood 56 years earlier, and served the first customer, an elderly woman who had been a regular back in the 70s. She ordered a loaf of sourdough and a cannoli. She took one bite and said, "This is it, this is exactly it." That night after closing, I sat alone in the empty bakery. The lights were off except for the street lamp glow through the window. The ovens were still warm. The mixer was silent. I opened the safe in the back office and pulled out my grandmother's recipe book. I had never read the last page, I don't know why. Maybe I was saving it, maybe I was afraid it would be the end. I turned to the final entry, dated 3 weeks before her death. Her handwriting was shakier than usual but still legible. Rachel, if you're reading this, then you have the bakery, you have the recipes, you have everything you need. But you also need to know something I never told anyone. When I came to America, I had nothing. No money, no family, no future. The only thing I had was a promise to my mother that I would carry her recipes to a new country and never let them die. You are that promise fulfilled. I knew Emma would try to take what wasn't hers. I knew your father would be too afraid to stop her. That's why I left the codicil with Goldstein. That's why I wrote the inscription in this book. I needed you to have proof that the recipes were yours, not because you were the favorite, but because you were the one who understood. You understood that the recipes are not just flour and water. They are memory. They are love. They are the taste of a Sunday morning in Naples translated through a lifetime of work. Don't be angry at Emma. She was never trying to steal the recipes. She was trying to steal the story of being the one who mattered. But stories don't belong to the person who tells them loudest. They belong to the person who lives them. You lived this story, Rachel, every early morning, every failed batch, every hour of silence. You lived it, and now it's yours. Keep baking. With all my love. Nana. I closed the book. I sat in the dark bakery, surrounded by the smell of bread and the hum of the refrigerator, and I cried, not from grief, from gratitude. From the weight of being seen, truly seen, by someone who had believed in me long before I believed in myself. The next morning, I opened both locations. My father was at the Westchester store, managing the morning rush. One of the original employees from the 1980s had come out of retirement to work the register at Mulberry Street. The sourdough starter, the 70-year-old culture, was thriving. And I knew, for the first time in 5 years, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The franchise lawsuit against Emma was settled out of court. Heritage Bread recovered $200,000. Emma sold her house, her car, her furniture. She moved to a small town in Central Florida. I received one final letter from her, not an apology, but a request. She asked if I would send her a loaf of sourdough for Christmas. I sent it, no return address, no note, just the bread. She never wrote back. My father now works at the bakery 3 days a week. He cleans the ovens. He takes out the trash. He greets customers. He doesn't ask for a title or a salary. He just shows up. And every time he walks through the door, I remember the letter my grandmother wrote. Stories belong to the person who lives them. He's living it now too, in his own way, late, imperfect, but real. The business has grown. We now supply sourdough to 4 local restaurants. We're developing a mail-order operation. The trademark is mine, the recipes are protected, and the name Rossi's Bakery is no longer just a memory. It's a living thing shaped by the past but breathing in the present. But the real payoff wasn't the money. It wasn't the legal victory. It was the moment I looked across the counter at the Mulberry Street opening and saw my father holding a tray of cannoli, laughing with a customer, his face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since I was a child. It was the moment I realized that forgiveness is not a feeling. It's a decision. You decide to let the door stay open even when the person walking through it doesn't fully deserve to be there because the door isn't for them. It's for you. It's the decision that you will not be defined by the worst thing that happened to you. And that, more than any court ruling, is the real victory. The bakery is busy, the ovens are warm, And somewhere in a small kitchen in Florida, my cousin is eating a piece of bread she didn't earn. That's fine. Bread is meant to be shared, even with the people who hurt you. My grandmother's voice is in the recipe book. My father's footsteps are on the floor. And the sourdough starter, the one she brought from Italy in 1967, is still alive, still rising, still proving that the things worth keeping cannot be stolen, sold, or erased. They can only be passed on. And I am passing it on. And I am passing it on, but here's what I've learned that I didn't understand when this story began. The recipes were never really the point. The legal victory, the money, the reopening, those were milestones, not destinations. The real inheritance wasn't flour and water and a 70-year-old starter. It was the lesson that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the chapter that forces you to become who you were meant to be. There's a question I still get asked, and maybe you're wondering it too. Would I have been better off if none of it happened? If Emma had never lied? If my family had believed me from the start? I used to think yes. I used to replay the alternative timeline, the one where I stayed at the bakery, where I never had to fight, where my grandmother's recipes were never threatened. But that version of me wouldn't have learned what I learned. She wouldn't have discovered that she could survive being erased. She wouldn't have found the strength to rebuild from nothing. The truth is, I don't know if Emma ever really hated me. I think she hated herself, and I was the mirror she couldn't break. But her lie gave me a gift I didn't ask for, the gift of proving to myself that I could stand alone. And that's a gift you can only receive when you have no other choice. The bakery is still open, both locations. The sourdough starter is still alive. My father still shows up on Saturdays, and last week a young woman came into the Mulberry Street store with a notebook. She told me she was studying culinary arts, that she'd seen the news story, that she wanted to learn how to make bread that meant something. I handed her an apron and showed her the starter. She's 23. She reminds me of myself. That's the part they don't put in the legal filings. The part where legacy isn't about ownership, it's about who you let into the kitchen. If this story made you think about your own family, your own battles, or the thing you're still waiting to prove to yourself, drop a comment. Tell me what you would have done. And if you want to see more stories like this, real people fighting for what matters, hit subscribe, because the truth doesn't expire. It just waits for the right moment to rise. I'll see you in the next one.